Unit 3, Judah's relationships with their surrounding nations. Let's look back at the timeline real quick. So we've got the kingdom splits right here, okay? So you have the time of the king, Saul, David, and Solomon. Before this, the kingdom splits. So this is a little bit of review, but we have Israel and Judah, and then we have the end of northern Israel, which was the Assyrian dispersion, and then at the end of Judah is the Babylonian captivity. So we've talked about these. We know that kind of where these fit. So I bring these up because I want you to kind of keep those in mind, because I'm going to pull the titles off for a second. And the reason why is because I want to look at the history of Judah in a distinct way. In fact, the history of Judah is easily divided by its dealings with three important neighboring nations. So Judah had relationships, and the kings of Judah had relationships of different kinds throughout its 350-year time span. But it was the relationships with three distinct nations that kind of marked three distinct phases of Judah's history. And those nations are these: Israel, Assyria, and Babylon. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we go back to the timeline, the first season was how Judah related to Israel. So this would be kind of the Israel phase, almost right up to the end. And you can see a very similar thing with Assyria, which was the phase that followed. And then you have the Babylon phase. So these are generally ways of kind of identifying the history of Judah as it really kind of happened. In fact, it really goes through lines of kings as well. So if we look at Israel, the first one for a second, so this was about a 190-year time span, and it was pretty much from the first king of Israel, Rehoboam, up to King Jotham. In fact, if we kind of pull that up and zoom in a little bit, you can see it kind of from Rehoboam to Jotham. That was a distinct time period, because the main issue happening here was what was going on in northern Israel, because at this time there was constant strife. The 10 tribes of the north had defected against the southern kingdom of Judah, and use all this fighting between Rehoboam and Jeroboam and people that followed. And so, but really the main issue that was dealt with the prophets such as Elijah and Elisha, as well as Amos and Hosea a little bit later, was this issue of idol worship. And it happened a lot in the north, but it definitely affected what was going on in the south as well. So that was one of the key seasons or phases of Judah's history, was that first one with Israel. But then we move into the second one, and now we're into the more Assyria phase, because as the northern Israel begins to kind of decline, it is Assyria who becomes a dominant world superpower right around that time, and they end up, of course, taking over northern Israel. But this was about 120-year time frame, roughly from the kings Ahaz through King Josiah. We can look at it here. So from Ahaz to Josiah, this is kind of the Assyria time, because here is where Assyria is a dominant force, and they come in, they overtake northern Israel, and that is a huge factor for Judah. But another really important thing, as we will see, is the role of the prophet Isaiah, because Isaiah becomes a key figure during this time that God uses while Assyria is attacks northern Israel and is a threat to Judah. Isaiah is a predominant figure during this time. So that's kind of a quick overview of the second one, the Assyria one. So you have Israel, the first phase, Assyria is the second phase, and then Babylon is the third phase. And this is a shorter phase, but it's a really important one, because it was about 22 years where Babylon was now the threat. So Assyria kind of diminished in power, but as they did, Babylon then became the major threat to Judah. And these are represented through the last kings of Judah, Jehoiakim through Zedekiah. So you can see kind of Jehoiakim, his son Jehoiachin, and the last king of Judah, Zedekiah. And man, a whole lot of stuff happens right at the end of Judah. But the predominant force happening now is Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar is a force to be reckoned with. And so you have this impending attack and overtaking and captivity of the inhabitants of Judah. But again, you also have, as a major factor, is the role of the prophets, specifically Daniel, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, before and during the captivity in Babylon. So that's kind of the three phases. That's kind of the Babylon phase right there. And so you have the Israel phase, the Assyria phase, and the Babylon phase. And those are the three distinct seasons in the history of Judah. that we can look to, and we can see the prophets and the kings and kind of how they relate within each phase, right? But throughout the history of Judah, what did God do? God raised up prophets. The prophets, as we said earlier, are going to be central to the development of what God is doing in this time. So the prophets are raised up to speak to the people. And so what I want to do is I want to start to really now look at the prophets of Judah. So in the next unit, in Unit 4, let's start with what we call the minor prophets of Judah. We're going to start and look at all of the minor prophets that God used. Again, minor only being in the length of what they wrote, not in the importance. So join me, if you would, in Unit 4 as we look at the minor prophets of Judah.